In 1934, Hollywood established the Production Code Administration as a way to censor movies without government interference. The PCA required that all movies gain a certificate of approval before being shown to the public. They strictly banned nudity and violence in movies, but in 1960, one iconic scene would challenge the censors the PCA imposed and would change movies forever. For those in the audience who may have been living under a rock your entire lives, that scene was from the 1960 classic Psycho, directed by the one and only Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock was born in Leytonstone, England on August 13, 1899, the youngest of 3 children born to William and Emma Jane Hitchcock. He was raised in a strict Catholic home and described his childhood as lonely and sheltered. He suffered from obesity and was very sensitive about his weight, even as an adult. When he was 5 years old, his father sent him to the local police station with a note asking the police to lock him up for 5 minutes because he had behaved badly. This helped instill a fear of police and a hatred of wrongful accusations, which were both often seen in his films. When Hitchcock was 15 years old, he attended London County Council School of Engineering and Navigation, then spent the first few years of his career as an advertising designer and writer. During this time, he developed an interest in photography, which led him to working in London's film industry. He started out designing title cards for silent movies, but it only took him 5 years to become a director. It was apparent from the start that he had a talent that would soon change the film industry forever. One way he was different from most directors is that he had a female assistant director. When Hitchcock met Alma Rayville in the 1920s in Berlin, she was already well known for her abilities at UFA, the German film studio. During this time, it was uncommon for women to work in film, let alone in such a prestigious role. Hitchcock was just an aspiring director at the time, with advertising copies and set designs to show his talents. He wanted to be sure that his directing career would be able to support a family, so he waited until he had 3 films under his belt before he felt he was worthy to marry her. The pair married in 1926, and 2 years later they had a daughter, Patricia. For the first few years of his career as a director, he lived and worked in London, but people from all over the world knew and liked his dark subject matter, suspenseful scenes, plot twists, and shocking endings. He was especially liked because of his personality, which he showed in interviews and even by cameo appearances in his own films. In 1939, Hitchcock moved his family to Hollywood, and the next 3 decades of film work would make him a legend. Hitchcock created more than 50 feature films during his career, and his television anthology, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, ran from 1955 to 1965. He was able to develop his own style and also integrate new cinematic technologies in his work. The progression of these technologies can be seen throughout his films. Hitchcock's first film, The Pleasure Garden, was a silent film done in 1925. He would go on to direct 7 more silent films before his 1929 film, Blackmail, made some noise on the big screen when it became his first film that included sound. His first Hollywood movie, Rebecca, done in 1948, was also his first movie in color. Hitchcock said that his favorite film to direct was Shadow of a Doubt, done in 1943. In this movie, Joseph Cotten plays a serial strangler whose niece begins to suspect of nefarious deeds. The audience can tell she is beginning to suspect her uncle by the way she looks at him. An iconic scene in the movie is when Cotton's character releases tension by strangling a piece of toast and is seen by his niece. It is then that he knows that she knows what he has done, and Hitchcock does what he does best, frightens the audience when the strangler tries to silence his niece. The film critic Arthur Vicello said Hitchcock was able to frighten the audience so easily by mastering contrast, balancing the normal against the abnormal, slowness against speed, sound against silence, humor against terror. He placed the dark and macabre in everyday settings and made them not only plausible but possible. Some of his biggest films show everyday life and how it can quickly become scary and out of control. He made the audience believe in what he was showing them by making it realistic. As if to squash any doubt that audiences may have had about Hitchcock's films being possible, the infamous murderer Ed Gein was caught by Plainfield, Wisconsin police on November 16, 1957. The details of his house of horrors shocked, terrified, disgusted, and fascinated the nation, but Alfred Hitchcock wasn't just intrigued by the news of Gein's grisly home and deeds. He was inspired by them. This led him to create arguably his best and most well-known film, Psycho, which debuted in 1960 and horrified audiences so badly that there were reports of moviegoers fleeing the theaters, crying in the theater, and even vomiting because the murder scene in the movie was unlike anything that had been put on the big screen before. Gein forced America to admit that mental illness could create true evil, but Hitchcock made America realize that evil could be closer than they expected. Psycho did more than just scare people silly, though. It changed film forever. This was the first time a film directly took on the taboo of sex and violence in Hollywood in a mainstream way. It shattered the walls the censors built to keep those things out, and those walls have never been rebuilt. In his book, The Moment of Psycho, How Alfred Hitchcock Taught America to Love Murder, David Thompson, America's preeminent film historian, says it gave America what it wanted and gave filmmakers permission to make what they wanted. Sex and violence were ready to break out, he writes, and censorship crumpled like an old lady's parasol. The orgy had arrived. By today's standards, Psycho is tame, but it took this film to get where we are with horror and suspense movies. It took this masterpiece to change censorship in film. The censors didn't go down without a fight, however. They objected heavily, saying they saw a breast in profile. Some say they saw a nipple. Others thought they saw a navel. Hitchcock assured them that there was no nudity, no shots of the knife actually hitting flesh, and no censorship rules were actually broken. He insisted it was all a trick of the mind imagining the horror. The movie also shows actress Janet Leigh in a bra and panties in the opening scene, which was shocking because no American movie had shown an actress in her underwear. It also shows something else on screen for the first time, a flushing toilet. The taboo-breaking movie wasn't just popular because of the taboos, however. It also had wonderful cinematic technique that took massive amounts of work for how cheaply it was shot. It cost only $807,000 to make, which Hitchcock paid for himself because his production company, Paramount Pictures, found the script to be unsavory and wouldn't finance it. He used his CBS television crew to make the film. The 45-second shower scene contained 78 pieces of film. That was unheard of at the time. Even though color was possible, Hitchcock chose to keep the film in black and white for several reasons. One, the blood in the shower scene would not have made it past the censors if it had been shown in color. Second, the horror of the film was made darker by not adding color. And finally, it was cheaper to film in black and white, which allowed him to spend money and time on other things that made the film perfect. For example, in the shower scene there is just 45 seconds of music that add to the building terror, but that music took up 9 of the film's 27 shooting days, a third of the production schedule. Another way this movie changed film was how it was advertised. Hitchcock created one of the first known publicity campaigns for a film, starting with insisting that no one would be allowed into the theater after the movie started, which was odd at a time when people leisurely entered movies at any point in the action. For this movie, though, being there from the start was important, as the film's biggest star is murdered just 40 minutes into the movie, and the suspense hinged on a vital secret. The movie was based on the book Psycho by Robert Bloch. To keep from ruining the movie, Hitchcock bought up all the copies of the novel on which Psycho was based. The campaign worked, and people lined up to see it. It became Hitchcock's highest-grossing film, raking in $32 million. Worldwide, it made more than $50 million at the box office. It was the second highest-grossing movie of the year, with the smallest budget. The movie that made the most in the box office that year, Spartacus, only made $10 million more, but cost almost $10.3 million to make, compared to a budget of under $1 million for Psycho. On the heels of his success with Psycho, Hitchcock directed The Birds in 1963. This film showed how far movies came in just 3 years after Psycho was released. One of the most famous scenes is of actor Tippi Hedren being attacked by birds. There are close-up shots of the birds biting her and tearing at her skin and clothing, which is very different from just 3 years before, when the knife isn't allowed to be shown cutting actress Janet Leigh's skin. Also, in The Birds, the blood is shown in color rather than in black and white. While Hitchcock is undoubtedly a master at his craft, not everyone cared for him as a person or even as a director. There were tensions between he and Hedren even before The Birds finished filming. Although the reasons why weren't made clear, rumor had it that Hitchcock developed an unhealthy fascination with her. Others have said, though, that his attention to her was simply to mold her into the actress he needed for his films. Actress Kim Novak, who starred in Vertigo in 1958, was reportedly cross with Hitchcock because he forced her to wear a certain color of dress that she didn't like. The dress was for the film, though, and Hitchcock was not known to sacrifice the integrity of one of his movies for the whims of his actors. This particular color was needed for the lighting to be just right in his shots. Hedren and Novak were just a few of the blonde actresses that Hitchcock employed. He had a long line of them, including Janet Leigh, Doris Day, Marlene Dietrich, and Grace Kelly, and he once famously said that blondes made the best victims. Hitchcock was interviewed multiple times by author Francois Truffaut, and in one interview he said, "You know why I favor sophisticated blondes in my films? We're after the drawing room type, the real ladies, who become whores once they're in the bedroom, because sex should not be advertised, because without the element of surprise, the scenes become meaningless. There's no possibility to discover sex." In the 1983 biography, The Dark Side of Genius, The Life of Alfred Hitchcock, Donald Spoto wrote that Hitchcock was a creep with an affinity for the macabre, had mother issues, and a need to be in control of all aspects of his films. Spoto said that Hitchcock's films were nothing more than projections of his own sick fantasies, and they gave him an opportunity to be near the blondes he couldn't have in real life. Overbearing mothers, control and dominance, distrust of police, molding women into a perfect image, and voyeurism are all themes seen in Hitchcock's films over and over, with beautiful blonde women at the center of it all. Examples of overbearing mothers can be seen in Psycho and in Notorious. In Vertigo, one can see the idea of molding a woman into a specific image, as well as the theme of control. Control is also a theme in The 39 Steps. Mistrust of the police can be seen in Strangers on a Train and Shadow of a Doubt. As for voyeurism, this can be seen in the movies Rear Window, Shadow of a Doubt, Psycho, The 39 Steps, and more. In addition, Hitchcock, sitting behind his camera and watching his pretty blondes perform on stage for him, is a voyeur, as are all moviegoers when they watch a film. Many writers worked with Hitchcock, but he was generally the one to write the majority of his scripts. He never names himself as a writer on his films, though. Furthermore, he would frequently change things in his films if his wife, Alma, said they needed to be changed, even when the film suffered for it. For example, in Vertigo, Novak's character is crossing a square. The camera cuts away, then back to her, and she's miraculously on the other side of the square. Hitchcock had a scene of her running across the square, but Alma said it looked unflattering to Novak, so Hitchcock deleted it, even at the expense of a continuity error. For a man who supposedly was rigid and unwavering, Hitchcock had no problem compromising and giving away credit when it was needed, and he always listened to his wife. Hitchcock received 2 Golden Globes, 8 Laurel Awards, and 5 Lifetime Achievement Awards. His film Rebecca won an Oscar for Best Picture in 1940. He has also been nominated 5 times for an Academy Award for Best Director, and he received a knighthood from Queen Elizabeth II in 1980. Sir Alfred Hitchcock passed away on April 29, 1980, of kidney failure. He left us with many fantastic works of film in which to remember him and his creative genius, and he changed film forever. While Hitchcock did have controversy surrounding him, especially pertaining to the blondes in his life, Thompson suggests Hitchcock's ultimate goal was to seduce his audience with the voyeuristic thrill of seeing its own dark side mirrored on screen. As Norman Bates says,
"We all go a little mad sometimes.